Hello everyone, we are back with a new video in the Retroid Pocket 2 series. Now, in our previous video we have seen the emulation of the Super Nintendo. As I mentioned there, during that period of the Super Nintendo it was the height of the first console wars. The two main rivals of that period was Nintendo with its Super Nintendo and Sega with its Mega Drive or Genesis console as it was known in the other side of the pond. Now Sega tried and utilized aggressive marketing saying Sega does what Nintendo don't to differentiate its proposition from the more kid-friendly Nintendo console towards a more teenage and cool, let's say, a proposition that the Genesis or the Mega Drive was. The Mega Drive and the Sega consoles was more targeted to teenagers when compared to the younger audiences that Nintendo had through its Super Nintendo console. Now, what we are going to do in this video, we are going to have a look at the emulation of that particular console, and I'm talking of course about the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis. You are going to hear a lot of me saying Mega Drive because I'm from Europe and this is how this console was known to us. But it's the same. The only thing that was different was the name, and it was a big decision for Sega to market its product with different names in the two major markets, USA and Europe, or PAL territories in general. Now, what we are going to do in this video, we are also going to use RetroArch, this famous and trustworthy emulator, and we are going to have a look at 9 different Mega Drive or Genesis games that I suggest you try for this system. Now, as always, the first step is to download the appropriate core for Sega Genesis or Sega Mega Drive ROMs. And this one is Genesis Plus GX. So you would have to launch your RetroArch application, go to Load Cores, then Download, and then you have to select the Genesis Plus GX core. Wait a few seconds until it's downloaded, and then it is available, so you will have to go back, load core, select Genesis Plus GX, and then we are ready for our next step. So now that we have our core loaded, we can go to the ROM selection. And in order to do that, we have to go here where you have to start scanning. You will select the folder where you have downloaded all your Mega Drive or Genesis ROMs, and then select Scan this directory. The required time, of course, depends on the number of ROMs and how big the files are, but usually it takes around half a minute to 1 minute for 10 to 15 ROMs, again depending on the size of those compressed files. Now, when this is done, we can find the available ROMs or games that we can check under this section where it shows the iconic gamepad of the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis. We are now ready to go to our first game, which in our case is Earthworm Jim. Now, this is a run and gun platform game. It was developed by a British company called Shiny Entertainment, which doesn't exist anymore, and it was released for the Sega Mega Drive in 1994. Now, its success, of course, led to several ports to other systems, so you can find Earthworm Jim for most of the common platforms from back in the day, like Super Nintendo. It was also ported for the PC. I believe it was also ported to the Amiga. But all in all, this is a very nicely 2D platform game. The sprites and the animations are amazing. However, especially if you are not used to this type of games, it can be quite challenging. It requires some time for you to get a hold of its controls. You can move around, you can jump, you can use your head as a whip, more or less, and you can also use your gun. You have to, as the title says, run and gun, but you also have to solve a couple of puzzles as you move along in order to progress. As you can see here, you have to use your gun to drop this fridge and launch this cow. Now, as already mentioned, it is a difficult game. You have to get used to it, but other than that, it is a great platform game that unfortunately we don't find anymore. Earthworm Jim series had 4 games released up until the company was sold to another company, then it was resold, and then it was dissolved. So we lost the franchise, and we lost any possible let's say updated remake or a new release in this series. This is a very cool character, and it is typical of the way that Sega wanted to market its characters and its games during the 90s. With regards to emulation, this game plays without any issues, no crackling sound, no input lag whatsoever, so you can download the ROM, it's everywhere, and enjoy this amazing series of games in the Sega Mega Drive. If you like this game, you can also get the sequels like Earthworm Jim 2, which was also released for the Sega Mega Drive. It also plays without any issues, so you can enjoy all those games of the Earthworm series in your Retroid Pocket 2 using RetroArch. Moving on, we have a Sega IP, and this is Golden Axe 2. This is the first home console release in the Golden Axe series, and it is a game that from the early years of the Mega Drive life. It was released in 1991, and it was the first sequel to Golden Axe, which was a very successful arcade game developed by Sega. Golden Axe 2 is a side-scrolling beat-em-up with a lot of hack and slash influence in it, set in a dark fantasy or medieval setting. As you can also see from the actual artwork and the whole style that is quite reminiscent of the hack and slash genre, both in games and in movies that was very popular in the 80s and the very early 90s. Now, the player is given a choice of 3 fighters. The first one is Axe Battler, who is wielding a two-handed sword. You can also select a dwarf called Gilius Thunderhead, who is wielding an axe. And also you have a female character, which is the longsword wielding Amazon type called Tyrus Flare. The gameplay, characters and graphics are more or less identical to that of the arcade release, but this home console port had a few improvements, like you don't have to use this back attack, but you can use a special attack that hits enemies in all directions, and I'm going to show you this right here. Is a special attack. You can also find it in other games like Shinobi. You can also get some monsters that you can ride in order to help you as you progress, and all in all, it's a very similar port, a very similar game to that of the arcades, and it is considered one of the top 15 games released for this system. The emulation is totally fine, you don't have any issues, so you can enjoy this Golden Axe game and this Golden Axe series. Our next game is The Lion King, a platform game released for the Sega Mega Drive back in 1994. It was simultaneously released to the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, and it was based on the mega smash hit of the Lion King Disney movie. Now, what is special about this video game is that all the sprites and characters were designed by Disney directly. It was designed by Walt Disney Feature Animation, and the soundtrack and the whole music was that of the original movie that it was adapted for the 16-bit systems. Now, as you can see, the graphics are amazing, and you have to play as Simba as he progresses through various settings that are based in the movie. You begin with Simba as a young cub, and then he is moving on to being an adolescent. Now, all in all, this game is very nicely drawn, but it can become a bit repetitive from time to time, and it is quite difficult, quite daunting, especially for players that are not used to the overall platform games of the 90s. Now, with regards to emulation, it runs without any issues on the Retroid Pocket 2 using RetroArch. So if you like a quite challenging platform game with great graphics and nice settings and a bit of nice soundtrack, I would say, don't forget to try The Lion King for the Mega Drive or Sega Genesis. Moving on, it's time for our fourth game in this video. It is another platformer developed by Sega, and it is again based on Disney characters. We are talking, of course, about Quackshot starring Donald Duck. Now, this is a side-scrolling platform game that stars Donald Duck and his three nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. They are treasure hunters, and they move through some levels that are split in the overworld and a dungeon section. As you can see here, the game starts with a nicely drawn introduction with a bit of text that explains the story and the setting so far. Now, when the actual game begins, you control Donald Duck, who is moving around using a plunger shooter, and this gun is shooting plungers that they temporarily stun the enemies. Later on in the game, you can use this plunger shooter to traverse through various platforms in the level, or even shoot this plunger to a flying bird and then jump on it and grab from the plunger in order to move around. If you are a fan of the 2D platformers, and especially on the Disney way of designing characters and animations, this is the game for you. The emulation runs without any issues, but it is an overall problem of this game, the way the scrolling works. As you can see, it has a bit of flickering and a bit of delays, but if you get used to that, it becomes really nice to the eye and how it plays. Now, moving on, we have a different type of game, but that it is, however, indicative of how Sega wanted to market and place the Mega Drive. We are talking about a racing game developed by Electronic Arts that has a twist in it. First of all, it is a bike racing game. It's Road Rash 3. But it has also a new feature that it is not that common to racing games. You can use your fists, you can use your hands to attack other bikers and throw them off the road or throw them off their bikes in order to get a better position as the race goes on. This game came out in 1995, and it was actually the last game released by Electronic Arts for this system. It was the third installment to the Road Rash series, and it received quite positive reviews, especially on the upgraded graphics, the locations that pushed the system to its limits, but the audio is a bit choppy and can become quite boring from time to time. Other than that, the controls and the gameplay is greatly improved when compared to the previous installments on the series. The emulation of this particular game runs without any issues on the RetroArch, so if you like a different racing game, I suggest you try it. For our sixth game, we are going back to a Sega developed game, and this time it's an action one. This is Shinobi 3. Now, Shinobi means ninja. Actually, in Japanese, ninja is a more slang, let's say, term. Shinobi is the actual term that the Japanese use for this type of stealth fighters. Now, this game was initially planned for release in 1992, but Sega was not satisfied with how the game was being developed, so they pushed back the development, changed a lot of things, and then released it for the Genesis or the Sega Mega Drive in 1993. Now, compared to its predecessor, The Revenge of Shinobi, this is more fast-paced with emphasis on action and combat. You can use 4 different ninjutsu techniques in order to kill your enemies, and it has more moves. You can now dash and attack at the same time. It has a bigger number of enemies, different ninjas and bosses that you have to fight, and overall it is, to me, one of the best action games for the Sega Mega Drive. It is quite heavily influenced by the original arcade game, not that stealth oriented as the Shadow Dancer that we saw earlier in the arcades and other systems. All in all, this is a very nicely designed game with amazing graphics and good scrolling and animations and special attacks that it is typical of the good golden era of Sega Mega Drive games. The emulation runs perfectly, you don't have any delays, the sound is amazing, and it has compositions from the original composer of the Shinobi series. So if you haven't tried the Shinobi game, I suggest you begin with the previous one, The Revenge of Shinobi, which is the first game in the series, and then move on to this one, which is more fast-paced and an improved sequel to the original. This is a true classic, especially for Sega fans and for Sega Mega Drive or Genesis fans, that you can enjoy to its fullest by using RetroArch on your Retroid Pocket 2. Moving on, as mentioned in other videos, there is never a complete Sega video without a Sonic game. So now we are going to test Sonic 3. Now, this is a 1994 released game. It is a platform one developed by Sega, and it's part of the Sonic the Hedgehog series. This was initially planned to be developed as an isometric game like the Sonic 3D Blast, but it became a typical 2D platformer due to time constraints. The development began after the release of Sonic 2, and it took place simultaneously with Sonic and Knuckles. Initially the plan was to develop those two games as one, but due to the cartridge capability constraints, it was split to 2 games. The Sonic 3 cartridge can be attached to an adapter on the Sonic and Knuckles cartridge, creating a combining game, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but you have to own both games separately. Players can control Sonic, Tails or both, and if they control Sonic, then Tails runs along beside him. Sonic 3 adds the ability for Tails to fly for a short time by spinning his twin tails something like a helicopter. Sonic 3 takes place over 6 zones, each divided in 2 acts, where the monsters or the enemies are the Dr. Robotnik's robots called Batniks. Sonic and Tails can defeat Batniks by jumping on them or using the spin dash attack, which also gives the character a speed boost. There is a mini boss fight with one of Robotnik's large, let's say, servants or powerful robots at the end of each level. When the player reaches a new level, the game saves to one of the 6 available save slots. Sonic games are amazing, of course, and this particular one runs without any issues on the RetroArch. Now, moving on, we are going to test a fighting game, and we are testing one of the 2 most famous fighting game series ever. We are talking, of course, about Street Fighter 2. This is the special Champion Edition that also includes a hyper mode, but other than that, it also has the 4 bosses from the main game, I'm talking about Balrog, Vega, Sagat and Bison, as playable characters for the player to select. Now there are also some improvements in the actual design, especially in the backgrounds, and some redesign of the characters, especially on the facial expressions. Other than that, the game has all the moves and the special attacks that the characters have. Some of them have been modified a bit in order to control the actual balance, as they have included the bosses. If you remember, those 4 bosses were quite hard in the initial game, but now that they are controllable characters, they have some of their special moves toned down. Other than that, it's the typical Street Fighter game where you have to beat a number of challengers in order to reach the appropriate ending depending on the characters you're playing. Each character has his own backstory and his own ending. The game runs without any issues. You can have all those great combo attacks that define Street Fighter as one of the best fighting games ever. It's a series that is still strong today. It will continue to see releases on this IP, of course developed by Capcom. Now moving on to our final game, we have a beat 'em up which is considered to be among the top 5 games released for the Sega Mega Drive or the Genesis. I'm talking of course about the sequel to the original Streets of Rage. This is Streets of Rage 2. This series is known in Japan as Bare Knuckle, and it is a side-scrolling beat-em up developed by an ad hoc team by mostly Sega developers. It is exclusive to the Sega Mega Drive and the Sega systems, and it includes Axel Stone and Blaze Fielding from the original game, but it also introduces 2 new characters, Max Thunder Hatchet and Eddie Skate Hunter, who is the younger brother of Adam Hunter from the original game. It is a huge commercial success. It is regarded as the best entry of the series, a series that is still strong today, as we saw Streets of Rage 4 released for various systems in 2020, and it is also considered as one of the greatest video games of all time. This is a typical side-scrolling beat-em up in which 1 or 2 players fight against enemies, waves of enemies actually, while picking up weapons and items along the way. In addition to standard attacks, which have been expanded compared to the first installment of the series, each character can now perform a unique blitz attack by double tapping a direction before attacking. Now overall, this is a must for every Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis owner, as it is one of the best video games ever released, especially if you are a fan of beat-em up games. The emulation runs without any issues, the animations and the design of the characters are great, along with an amazing soundtrack that had became a staple of the series. Another interesting fact about this game is that its 2 main developers were brothers. We're talking about Ayano Koshiro. She is the designer of the graphics, characters and all combat mechanics, and her brother Yuzo Koshiro was the lead music composer. The programming was done by the same team that created the first game, and there were several ports of this game to other Sega systems like the Game Gear or the Master System, and even an arcade release that was based on the original game. Of course, the journey of this amazing system that was the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis does not end here with just those 9 games. There were many other games that were developed for this system, some of them exclusive and some of them ports from other arcades or systems that make up for a great library in one of the best console releases by Sega. Sega was very strong in the 16-bit era and had an amazing library of games and systems. Now, some other games that you can try and enjoy on the Sega Mega Drive include Wonder Boy in Monster World, which is known in Japan as Wonder Boy 5. It is the 5th game in the Wonder Boy series. You can also try Altered Beast, which is a 1988 beat-em-up arcade, again developed by Sega and then ported to the Sega Mega Drive. It had great, huge sprites. It is a 2D scrolling beat-em-up game that also had that unique mechanic where your character could pick up some level ups as he progressed and then upgrade or evolve to a bigger character with more moves and better attacks. Another interesting game is Toe Jam and Earl, which was developed by Johnson Wursanger Productions and published by Sega. It was released in 1991 and it centers around Toe Jam and Earl, two aliens who have crash landed on Earth. It is an interesting and quite unique game with an isometric view and a great story. Phantasy Star 4, it is a great, one of the very few RPGs released for the Sega Mega Drive. That was one of the problems with this system. Compared to the amazing number of great RPGs that were available to Super Nintendo, the Sega Mega Drive did not have such a huge library of Japanese RPGs, and that was one of its drawbacks actually, and it led also to the final outcome of the console wars. Finally, another interesting game is Ristar, which is a 1995 platform game developed and published by Sega. This features an anthropomorphic cartoon star characters in a world that resembles a lot the world by Sonic, but other than that the character is quite different and very interesting, and especially if you are a fan of the 2D side-scrolling platforms, then I suggest you try it alongside the Super Mario or Sonic the Hedgehog series. So everyone, that was all for our video showcasing the emulation of the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis on the Retroid Pocket 2. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please thumb up and subscribe to the channel as we have more content coming soon.